Chapter 1. Lorelle crouched on the lip of the roof, her belly so low it almost touched the wooden shingles. Her knees rose on either side of her head as she leaned forward. Her ragged soul burned inside her, filling her body with flames, but she forced herself to ignore the pain. She waited half a breath, then dropped to the second-story window without a sound. Her toes perched on the windowsill while her fingers pressed against the top of the recessed frame to hold herself in place over the three-story drop. She tested the latch. Unlocked. The secret society known as the Readers tried so hard to keep itself hidden. An unlocked window seemed strangely out of place. Perhaps they felt the whispered stories of their vengeful reputation were enough to dissuade thieves. Well, not this thief. She opened the window and slipped inside. Just below the windows, a decorative 6-inch ledge ran around the interior of the tall room. She crouched low and slid quickly to the side so her silhouette didn't show against the open window. The ceiling curved over her, requiring perfect balance to remain on the narrow ledge without falling. The most acrobatic of humans couldn't have accomplished it. But Lorelle wasn't human. Her muscles, her bones, even her blood were less dense than her heavy counterparts. A human woman Lorelle's size would weigh at least 150 pounds. Lorelle weighed 80, while her physical strength remained comparable, which meant she could leap higher, move faster, and balance her body in ways humans could never match. She looked at the huge library below. It was exactly as the thief master had described it, but even at that, it barely seemed real. How could this place be here, practically in the center of the city, and no one knew about it? Books and scrolls and bound sheaves of paper lined every wall. Large bookcases stretched across the length of the room, creating 7 aisles filled with untold knowledge. She surmised there were more secrets in this room than in the royal library. Neither Wren nor Slater had known about this place. But the thief master of the thin alley's thieves' clutch, a man named Zengi, had known. One of Zengi's thieves, the last person who dared to enter this secret library uninvited, had also known. He died for breaking into this place and stealing the mythic Plunos Lorelle also sought. The Plunos was the only way to open the Thuros in the basement of the palace that had swallowed Wren. And Lorelle was going to find it and take it. Since Wren's abduction through the Thuros 2 weeks ago, Lorelle had hunted for the key to follow. Her single-minded drive had pushed her to interrogate Vaughn and Slater, to tear through the palace library, and to visit every noble house that possessed a rare book that might contain some hints about the mystical Thuros. It had driven her to every dirty gambling house, shkazat den, and brothel where even a whisper of secret knowledge might be spoken. She barely slept, barely ate, and the ragged edge of her soul had tried its best to burn her alive. But she'd followed the alley gossip. She'd uncovered a promising whisper about Zengi's now dead thief. According to rumors, he'd held the Plunos in his hand, had sold it, and had reveled in his riches. Those stories had led her to Zengi, the master of the dead thief's clutch. Of course, thieves were secretive. Zengi hadn't wanted to talk. So she'd made him. With her fist squeezing his throat and her knee pressing on his groin, Zengi had finally panted out his secrets. He'd told her the story about the Reader Library. 3 years ago, a thief of the thin alley thieves' clutch had snuck in, even as Lorelle was doing now. He'd stolen a small casket of jewels, a book with a golden jewel-encrusted cover, and a thick, oversized coin with the royal Usaran symbol engraved on both sides. The thief had brought the jewels to this thief master, Zengi's predecessor at the time, who had taken a substantial cut as a leader of the clutch. After the clutch's fence had turned the items into gold, the thief had run to the lure of gambling and wenching to spend his earnings. 5 days later, he died in an accident. Drunk after a night of gambling, the thief slipped in the alley outside the gambling den, struck his head on the corner of a building, and passed out. That was unremarkable in itself. Drunks passed out in alleys every night in Usara. But in a twist of fate, the thief fell face first into a puddle created by a huge divot of missing cobblestone. He drowned there his head in half a foot of water. And that was the end of him. Bad luck, Zengi had thought at the time. 5 days later, Zengi's predecessor, the master of the Thin Alley Thieves' Clutch at the time, also died. One might have thought his death a murder if there hadn't been 5 witnesses in the room of the brothel. There had been a silk scarf on the floor, tied around the base of a bedpost. Zengi's predecessor slipped on the free end while his other foot shot back to catch his balance and caught the now taut scarf. He'd stumbled and slammed into the window. It might have ended there, with a broken window and some cuts, except the window was open. Without a sound, the thief master tumbled through, plummeted 3 stories to the cobblestones, broke his neck, and died. Bad luck, Zengi had thought without much remorse. After all, it opened the way for him to take leadership of the clutch. Exactly 5 days after the thief master's fall, like the workings of an insidious clock, the fence who'd handled the sale died. On a trip to the butcher's market, the fence stepped awkwardly off a poorly built curb and turned his ankle. The resulting stumble made him lurch in front of 4 draft horses hauling bars of iron. The horses' hooves mangled the fence, and the steel wheels nearly cut him in half. Grisly. 100-to-1 fluke, all the bystanders said. Zengi got the message that time. There was too much coincidence between the deaths to assume it was just bad luck. All 3 men had handled the items lifted from the reader's library. The next day, Zengi's first edict as thief master was, "Leave that building alone. Any thief coming back to the clutch with goods from the reader's library would be expelled from the clutch and thrown into the street with his eyes put out." "It was them readers that killed him," he gasped painfully to Lorelle as she leaned on his groin. "With magic!" Lorelle had heard of readers. In her ceaseless search for knowledge about the Plunos, the term readers had come up several times. She'd also heard it back when she and Ren had lived in the Laakadon forest. Ren and Vaughn had been obsessed with about anything concerning the Noctum, which had included stories about the history of giants, magic, and the human-giant war at the beginning of known civilization. The readers were a notable part of that history. As keepers of knowledge, they had been instrumental in defeating the giants during the human-giant war. After the giants vanished, the readers had promised to stay vigilant for their return. Except the giants had never returned, and the last recorded instance of a readers' conclave was centuries ago. Like the giants themselves, the readers seemed to have vanished. Except, apparently, they hadn't. After extracting the information from Zengi, Lorelle had returned to the palace to question Slater. As usual, the mage had eagerly regaled her with everything he knew. Slater was easier for Lorelle to be around these days than either Vaughn or Kyvan. The mage didn't comment on the dark circles under her eyes, her gaunt frame, or the fact that she was always away from the palace. He didn't look at her with soulful, hurt eyes. Slater acted like every day was a fresh adventure, and he didn't seem to notice or care about Lorelle's state of mind. When prodded, he would talk until he was blue in the face about anything regarding history or magic. It was as though his 10 years as a spy in Vamrith's court had driven him near to mad with the need to reveal secrets. Now he did so with abandon whenever he could. According to him, the readers might never have actually vanished. They might simply have removed themselves from the public eye. Could they make people become unlucky? She had asked him. Unlucky? Slater's eyes had lit with interest at the question. Lorelle, did you meet a lore mage? Just tell me about lore magic. Oh, well, it's fascinating. Lore mages pay close attention to moments and objects that seem inconsequential. They move trinkets from one place to another for no apparent reason. They give warnings that seem like gibberish, all because they have read bits of the future. Lore magic is the art of knowing what is going to happen so far in advance that a person can move these seemingly inconsequential things to a more favorable position by the time the mage interacts with the events they predicted. Then, by the time the future catches up with them, they are in the most favorable position to get what they want. So, lore magic makes a person lucky. No, Slater had shaken his head. Not at all. But it would look like that to the uninitiated. Lore magic is the opposite of luck. It's knowledge. It's a strategically using what no one else knows. It is thinking 2, 12, 100 steps ahead. His eyes had glittered. So tell me, did you meet a lore mage? She had left him with that eager look on his face and dove out a window, back into the night. Obviously, it was dangerous to offend a mage. But Lorelle had almost beaten her hands bloody on the Thuros in an effort to get it to work. She wasn't about to pass up a chance to get to Ren, no matter how dangerous. If the readers punished those who stole from them, reaching them wherever and whenever they wanted, it was a sure bet they'd also taken back what was theirs. But even if the readers no longer possessed the Plunos, they certainly knew about it. That small though it was, could be another lead, and Lorelle was running out of time. Her insides felt bloody and tattered, like a red-hot saw blade was being dragged back and forth across her vitals. Every day, the saw dragged deeper.